The Plateau, Chapter 3. For the Plateau, there was no time. It remained oblivious to the storm, the events that had precipitated it, and a tired hand that now crept over one of its rocky faces. Betu's lungs were aflame. His arms throbbed from the climb. His entire person dripped generously from the storm that whipped the cliff's edges. He looked around. No one or thing has been up here in a long time, he thought. There were some unremarkable ruins here, once a temple from the few things that retained some semblance of structure. To what, Betu didn't care. Glancing up at the circling clouds, some tiny part of him wondered whether he should. Why did I even come here? He still didn't know, but he was here, and apparently, it was not raining. He wiped his eyes with a soaked forearm and blinked. A disbelieving hand reached out, palm upwards, towards the heart of the ruins. The only droplets that struck it came from behind him, scattered by the winds that bounded and swirled around the cliffs. So the stories were true. The storm is a barrier. Betu looked around in awe, but he could not determine what was being protected here. Maybe that was the point? He glanced nervously at the eye of the storm, a hot pinprick of light in the center of the swirling clouds, poised near the center of the plateau some distance away. The eye stared back, unblinking, at him, at the unremarkable ruins, at everything and nothing in particular. Has its center always glowed? Betu couldn't recall any stories about that. He fought the sensation that the storm was alive and picked himself up, along with a wretched bag of fruit that had survived the climb. With no other choice, he began walking slowly towards the ruins. And at every step, imperceptibly at first, his vision began to darken. The Watcher observed Betu, or rather the symbols that represented him, approach the center of the ruins, like the three all those years ago before the storm began. This time, however, there were no concealed or brandished objects of horror. There was no resistance or pleading or dominance. Above all, there was no disharmony. The Watcher remained content. Unlike the three, however, Betu slowed near objects that still radiated some emotion from their builders. He puzzled over them, touched them, concentrated his gaze as if trying to read their symbols. How unusual. Can it see symbols? The Watcher inquired of the presence. Not yet, replied the presence. A vague feeling nagged at Betu, as if someone waited nearby with a suppressed giggle, waiting to be found. There is something here. He was sure of it. He investigated more objects, pillars, cobblestones, alcoves that may have once held statues but now so far beyond crumbling that only their bases still survived. The very rocks in this place seemed alive, yet at every turn he found himself caressing another inanimate object, with his questions firmly unanswered. Near the central altar, Betu almost tripped over a pair of skeletons. Now he noticed how dark things appeared and missed having a torch. How would he spend the night here? He didn't want to think about it. For the moment, he distracted himself by squinting at the skeletons and noticed he couldn't feel anything from them. How do the stones hum with emotion while these two do not? He wondered. These two could have been from anywhere or any when. One seemed equipped like the merchant guards of today, and the other was draped in the remnants of something too elaborate for a merchant or an ordinary traveler. Did you bring the storm with some act of self-sacrifice? Betu asked the bones. Did you desecrate these grounds and offend a god? No answers would be coming from them. The land had forgotten as many gods and even more rituals as people that had venerated them. Betu squinted away and found himself looking again into the entrancing eye of the storm, now nearly overhead. The longer he stared, the brighter it seemed to glow. And the brighter it grew, the the more he began to notice that things moved inside it. Betu's vision suddenly exploded into bright spots of light. Blindness! He panicked and shut his eyes tightly. But the spots grew in his vision and became more elaborate. They weren't artifacts of damaged eyesight. They were symbols, a script he had never seen before but seemed to understand. Looking around, he saw the altar was covered in them, as were the stones he had puzzled over on his walk. In fact, much of the ruins were covered in them. The skeletons near his feet had none. All his life, Betu had wondered whether the gods existed as people spoke of them. He had questioned the sacrifices called for by the priests and ritual smiths. He had even lost his family to those rituals, and he stood here in the shadow of those doubts, unsure whether they were thickening or dissipating. Is this a gift? He wondered. From whom? If any gods existed, they were nothing that priests would understand, nothing even he could understand. But he knew. He had been granted a glimpse into the world behind the world. What was he to do with it? And what can I possibly offer in gratitude? Betu saw more symbols radiate from his person. Doubt, fear, confusion, awe. He looked at his wretched bag of fruit, also covered in symbols. Sustenance, life, provisions. He took a few steps forward and placed the fruit on the altar. The latter's symbols glowed a little brighter. Offering, gratitude, hope. A few more joined them. Confusion, awe, finality. There was no divine reply. At least, none Betu could discern. He smiled, satisfied. This is why I came here. He stepped back from the altar, and the darkness sealed itself around his vision. To Betu, the world was a tapestry of faded patterns and shapes, everyone representing a different thought or emotion. Exhaustion, hope, sadness, horror, prayer. All stacked together into vague forms of crumbling walls and inconclusive pillars, all of which he understood. Behind the altar, something drew his attention. Not something, someone. A being whose quiet disposition held the weight of aeons. It was a child watching him. They observed each other for a time. With both of them stood the presence. It said nothing. It rarely did.